So I'm Jeff Soloway, and I'm the co-founder and chief training director of MindWell-U, and just delighted that you're all here today and that we were able to sponsor this event that's really made available by SHARE and ultimately by Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who came to Ottawa to be with us. And amazing to have this group of people in the room and to learn more about mindfulness. It's really our initiative to help spread the word about mindfulness and the practice about mindfulness into the workplace, into all facets of society, really. And I think it's fitting that we're here on the International Day of Peace because I've long held the belief that Jon's work has stimulated and instigated so much peace in the world, inner moving outward. So it's really fitting and to have Jon here. And it was probably about 10 years ago that I first met Jon. I was doing my PhD at the University of Toronto, and I was doing it in the area of education, mindfulness and education. At that time, it was kind of a new field. Many of you likely know it started within medicine and healthcare with Jon's work, and then it started to move into different arenas, and I was creating a program around mindfulness for teachers and teaching teachers at the teacher education school. And I was over the moon. I went down to Omega, which is a training institute in upstate New York, to do a training with Jon. And I took my books, and obviously I wanted to talk to Jon about the program that I was developing and teaching, and he took the time to sit with me over lunch, and I got a chance to talk to him about this program, and that really inspired me, and to continue with the work, and continue to have some conversations, and got a chance to go to more conferences and around mindfulness and the Center for Mindfulness and Mind and Life. And that really stimulated my work to continue to grow, and it grew into professional preparation and workplace contexts, and all in the lens of trying to develop this core competency or this literacy of mindfulness, which I think is really fundamental to what it means to be human, and that we all at least have should have the opportunity to at least be introduced to it. And what we do with that is ultimately our choice, but it's something that we could be at least introduced to, because it has a profound impact. And that's what really stimulated this development of my work into the next stage, from in-person training to also develop an online training, because I felt frustrated that we couldn't reach the populations that we wanted to. Working with teachers and people in the workplace had its limitations, both logistical and financial. And so we developed an online training, a 30-day mindfulness challenge, to try and bridge that gap. And it's been incredible, like the types of projects that I get to work on these days. It's, again, just totally brightening my heart when I get to work with universities and offering the training for students and staff and faculty at universities, or part of their professional preparation program for all students in a health program, for example. Or we work with airline pilots at WestJet, and part of their kind of culture initiative. And we've been fortunate to work with the Privy Council, and we've got Renee here to representing, and we did a pilot with them last year, and now we're rolling it out this year across the whole Privy Council. So we're really excited about that. And one other really exciting one is within mental health in Labrador and Newfoundland, that we're going to be participating in that coming up in the coming years. So it's all just been this evolution of excitement that's really part of a lifelong learning. And I think one essential foundation for me around mindfulness is that it's no one program. It's no one experience that is it. Mindfulness is a lifelong learning that we need to continue to enact, and looking for ways to support that. So I've given you a little bit of a pamphlet here, and that's a little bit of a gift. You don't need to look at that now, but it's the gift and the offering is really an opportunity to take our training later. So I've given you a little bit of information about that, and you can take that back and you can invite somebody else to do the training with. It starts in a couple weeks, and we'll follow up with you about that. So if you'd like to do that, you'd be more than welcome to. And I think in closing, I'm just coming back to who's sitting beside me, and the notion of a practice, the practice that makes a difference in my life. In the last 5 years, I've had 2 kids. I've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and starting a business, and you know, it's been the full catastrophe, like in all senses of the word. And the only thing I could come back to, you know, as much as I can, is this practice of mindfulness. And so totally delighted and grateful for Jon to be with us today, and for Cher to bring him and organize it in for all you. So I hope that we have a fruitful experience together.
It's me again, Scheherazade Danaro. Cher, really short, it's easier for everybody. I'll be very quick. Thanks, first of all, so much for being here. Time is so precious. I know you're all super busy, and I'm really, really touched that you were all able to come at such short notice. It's a very important day today. It's also a very important day today because we're making history. It's the International Day of Peace today. Jon and I are and some of the members of the Inner Space team here are just coming back from a visit to Parliament, which is very exciting, where we had a session very similar to this with our elected representatives. Who have all of the same issues, all of the same concerns, you know, as all of us here. So we're making history today by having been in Parliament, and at noon today we'll be outside Parliament, on the lawn of Parliament, for Ottawa's first mass mindfulness meditation. And I mean, who is Inner Space? Inner Space is all about creating these opportunities for people to come together and experience meditation and mindfulness, and hopefully benefit from that as a community. So we're really excited about that. So, as I think everyone here knows, mindfulness meditation is fast becoming mainstream, and I just wanted to let you know who's in the room here today. We have representatives from government, executive programs at universities, the International Women's Business Conference, the Women's Business Conference, I think, government. There's quite from Health Canada, from PCO. I think there's a nonprofit in here. There's myself, there's Jon, there's Jeffrey, a service provider. So we have, you know, quite a rich group here from across sectors, which is really wonderful. So I approached Jon just over a month ago to come to Ottawa for a mass mindfulness meditation. And it was with the full expectation that there's no way this is going to happen, because Jon's schedule books literally years in advance. But I still, even though I'm an economist and I should look at probability and numbers and things like that, I decided to ignore all that and follow my heart, and ask Jon to join us, because Jon is really my teacher in so many ways, who taught me that, you know, mindfulness really can be the foundation for a new way of being, a new way of living, for, you know, world peace, to cultivate love, compassion, kindness, empathy, all of these things that we all have within us. And so much gratitude to Jon. And Jon came on board immediately. Of course, it helped that it worked with his travel schedule, coming from Chicago, and I'm really grateful for that. So Jon is a major international force behind the global interest in mindfulness, and obviously an internationally known mindfulness teacher. He's taught world leaders at Davos, at the World Economic Forum, of course, many presentations at institutions like Harvard Medical School and Harvard School of Education. Jon was instrumental in developing something called the UK Mindful Nation Report. It's an all-parliamentary report that for the first time has mindfulness as the foundation for public policy. This is a really big deal. And of course, Jon, was a pioneer in bringing mind-body medicine into the mainstream with his mindfulness-based stress reduction program in 1979, which is now offered in over 700 hospitals worldwide. It's incredible. In 1995, he founded the famous Center for Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts. He's the author of 10 books that have been translated into over 40 languages. Incredible. And I'm sure many of you have read many of Jon's books, like Full Catastrophe Living, and Wherever You Go, There You Are. So I won't take much more of your time. We want to spend as much time as we can with Jon, but again, gratitude. Thanks so much for being here. It's a great honor and privilege now to turn the floor over to Jon. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. So, what's our time frame here? When do we end?
So we end at 11, about an hour, just under an hour.
Okay.
50 minutes.
So, let me just say to start that in that kind of time frame, there are, to a first approximation, an infinite number of moments, most of which we are going to miss. And soon it will be 11 o'clock and we'll be off to something else, and maybe you'll come to the thing at the, on the lawn, maybe won't. But I'm just delighted to be here, and probably the best way to get started would be to just all of us drop in for a moment to what I would call the domain of being as opposed to the domain of doing. And often the doing includes a lot of moving our mouth and moving our thoughts and stuff like that. And interestingly enough, the word discussion, you know, so we get together and we have discussions and just meetings at work. What do? They discuss. The word discussion comes from the same root meaning as the word concussion and percussion. And, you know, not surprisingly, you know, it's a clashing of ideas and egos and views and everything else. So I would prefer that we have what we might call a dialogue, or just even less pretentiously, a conversation, okay? And the most important part of the conversation is not Jon, or what you hear about Jon, but you. And a lot of that conversation is between you and yourself. And a lot of it actually happens wordlessly. So as long as it's mediated by words, it's just thoughts in the mind. But when we drop down underneath the surface activity of the mind and the waviness of the mind, there's stillness already. It's not like now you have to do some gigantic thing to get mindful. It's like your core default mode in a way, if you get out of your own way and in some sense don't get continually caught up in the perpetual weather patterns of the mind, you know, thoughts, motions, and so forth, likes and dislikes, future, the past, you know, where we spend almost all of our time and hardly any of it here. So why don't we take a few moments and just drop into being present? And it might help, if you care to establish yourself in a posture. These chairs are not ideal for that, but establish yourself in a posture that embodies wakefulness and dignity. So you'll notice I've moved away from the back of the chair, which has been falling into it. And just establishing yourself, but any way that works for you, establishing yourself in a posture that embodies wakefulness, as I said, and dignity, whatever that means. And becoming aware of simply sitting in the room. And if your eyes are open, of course you're drinking in the light, you're drinking in that we're all sitting around this table. And there's a soundscape and phones going off and all sorts of other things happening. But there's also a bodyscape, you know, that we often completely tune out. And here the invitation would be, see if you can drop into awareness of your body sitting here, breathing. Because I'm making a wild guess here, it's true for all of us, that every single person is breathing. And so can we actually just know it? Not through thinking about breathing, but by feeling our breath. Which, if we were going to coin a term in English for it, we say awarenessing our breath, or attending to the sensory field of breathing. And so that's the invitation, is can I ride on the waves of the breath sensations with full awareness, moment by moment by moment. Even as there are sounds in the room and you hear the clicking of cameras and sounds from outside in the world, in the street. Can I give the breath center stage in the field of, can I place it center stage in the field of my awareness? And just rest here, so to speak, riding or surfing on the waves of your own breathing with your attention. And when you tune into your experience in this way, basically what you're doing is you're stepping outside of clock time and into what we could call the present moment, or now, which really has a timeless element to it, because it turns out it's always now. So can we be at home here? Can we take up residency in our own awareness, simply feeling the breath moving in and out of the body, without pushing it, pulling it, forcing it, thinking about it, but just in some sense recognizing that the body is breathing itself. And for now, can you be at home here in this the spaciousness of your own awareness? Now, if you're brand new to something like this, or even if you've been doing it for 50 or 60 years, it doesn't take very long to discover that the mind has a life of its own. And just because some part of you has decided to ride on the waves of your breath with full awareness, sooner or later, that awareness is going to notice or register that you're off thinking about something else. Work has captured your attention, or thoughts about the family, or the past or the future. And the breath will be long gone. I mean, it'll still be keeping you alive, but your awareness of it will be, it's completely evaporated. And when you notice that that is the case, which is inevitable, so it's not like there's something wrong with you, when you notice that your attention is no longer on your breathing, noticing what's on your mind. Because you're cultivating a certain kind of familiarity or intimacy with what the mind actually does, and does virtually all day long. That most of the time is completely below the surface of our awareness. And then when you notice what's on your mind, just coming back to your body, to wherever the breath sensations in the body are most vivid for you. So the belly's a good place to feel the breath sensations, or the chest, or the nostrils, or a sense of the fullness of the breath from one end to the other. And once again, you're back home in awareness. Sort of your default mode, your default to wakefulness, to being fully present, without in this moment having to do anything. So you can actually really rest here, moment by moment by moment, and breath by breath by breath as we continue sitting. Bathing in the air, the breath, and in both an outer and an inner interior silence underneath all of the sounds that may be coming to the ears. Just the way if you went underneath in a body of water like the ocean, which can be quite turbulent depending on atmospheric conditions, but if you drop underneath 20 or 30 meters, it's always gentle undulations, even in big storms. And it's similar with the mind. The mind also has atmospheric conditions, thought storms, emotions, emotional upheavals. And if you bring awareness to them and you drop in this way, underneath the turbulence, there's already calmness. There's already calmness. It's already here. You don't have to get anything. And in fact, there's no special anything to get. What we're doing is actually recognizing how special it is to go from all the doing, and thinking, to simply being and letting the thinking and the doing and the hearing and the planning and the worrying and the reminiscing and the perseverating just do itself in this larger embrace of awareness. As we continue sitting here. So when thoughts come, you know that they're thoughts. And whether they carry away from the breath sensations in the body or not doesn't really matter. The thoughts are known as events in the field of your awareness, just like a cloud passing by covering the sun, and then the sun's still here, the cloud dissipates, the thoughts go away, and here you are again. Wakefulness itself, awareness itself. So this is a kind of, if you invite yourself to open your eyes, you'll notice that nothing changes. That you can just be aware through one more sensorium. Sitting around the table, now there's light coming into your eyes. There's a sense of like, if the room or the table or other people fell away, well, then you remember, oh yeah, I'm sitting around the table with a bunch of other people. You can still be just as aware. You can be absolutely just as aware. And if you got up and went outside, you could still be just as aware. So there's, in some very real way, there's no end to the meditation practice. If you are embodied and aware, and reminding yourself every time the mind goes off that you could actually ground it back in this moment, in the body, say, then there's no end to the meditation practice. And meditation practice, mindfulness, and life itself become coextensive. So what we just did, you could call a formal mindfulness practice, where you take some clock time and you say, during this time I'm going to just drop into being. Okay? And it's hard. This is not like some dime store thing that, you know, you're going to, it's extremely difficult for us human beings to string even 2 moments of awareness together without going into planning or, you know, worrying or reminiscing. But that's why it's worth doing. So it's hard, so the mind goes off, you bring it back. The mind goes off, you bring it back. Mind goes off, you don't want to bring it back. You're having too good a time with your mind, which happens a lot. You bring it back anyway. That's the discipline of it. Just the way you don't just exercise when it's sunny. You go out and run in the rain, or row in the whatever. I mean, that if you really aspire to train the body or to train your own mind to find a new way to be in wise relationship with experience, then you have to exercise the muscle. Mind goes off, notice what's on your mind, bring it back. Mind goes off, notice, bring it back. Mind goes off, don't want to bring it back, you bring it back anyway. And slowly what you're starting to build is actually a lot more impressive than a bicep muscle. What's actually happening in the brain, we now know from all sorts of studies in neuroscience of mindfulness, is that you're driving something called functional connectivity. You're actually driving new neuronal pathways on the basis of repetitive practice. And if you're repeating, for instance, depressive rumination, you're actually driving your brain into patterns of depressive rumination. And the more you practice, the better you get at it. Okay? But the more you write yourself a, say, restraining order, if that's understood in Canada, what I mean by that, then you'll notice that you can actually have other options than just doing the same old all the time. You break these very endemic patterns of self-relationship, self-talk, always like, what's wrong with me, feelings of whatever negativity you have about yourself, and realize those are not the truth. Those are just thoughts, and they're thought patterns, and they're narratives that we've gotten very comfortable at. The narrative of me and why I'm a this, why I'm not a that, who's to blame, all that kind of stuff. None of it is true. To a first approximation, none of it's true. And the other thing is that there's a lot being left out. So there could be other narratives like who you really are, and whoever you think you are, that's tiny in comparison to actually who you really are, and the beauty of having a body and having a brain and being alive. And by the way, did you notice the breath? We're still breathing? But I'm sure that you had many moments when, did your mind wander away from your breath? Anybody have your mind wander away from the breath and you notice it? Raise your hand so I can feel it. Okay, so see, it's universal. It's not like bad meditator. No, it's universal. It's like the Atlantic Ocean waves, Lake Ontario waves, the mind also waves. But that's not the entire story. Lake Ontario does not wave down deep. The human mind also does not wave down deep. But we're never taught how to actually befriend the entirety of our mind. So we're often caught in the storms and the turbulence. And I'm a failure, I'm too old, I'm too this, I'm too that. And you believe those as if they're thought, as if they're facts. They're not facts, they're thoughts, and they're thought patterns. They're toxic and missing your life in a certain way. So this practice is actually portable. I purposely didn't bring, or haven't, but didn't ring bells to start the meditation, end the meditation, because there's no end to the meditation. Okay? As long as you're hearing what I'm saying, and you're present in your body, and you're breathing, and you're aware of it, then you're meditating in a certain way. But you're also available to the world. So the world is, in some sense, offering itself to you, and how are you going to respond? So that could have profound repercussions in terms of, like, how many of you have small children at home? You said you did. So they're like live-in meditation teachers. You're going to push every single one of your buttons day in and day out, and watch how mommy or daddy loses his or her mind. or if you care to, you could actually see them as little live-in Zen masters or Buddhas and take their teachings. What is this opportunity actually inviting out of me? Rather than just anger or depression or, anxiety, time pressure, time anxiety, and then you see that mindful parenting is, like, in some sense, the most challenging and the highest form of meditation practice. Okay, because you will never have time to just sit and be still, you know, in certain cases. But that doesn't mean you can't meditate. I mean, it's all meditation when you're aware. And awareness is not something you have to get. It's something you're born with. So everybody already has what people start to think they're looking for. And St. Francis said that. What you're looking for is who is looking. You know, so these are kind of like deep questions that actually bring life to life instead of zoning along on autopilot through most of our moments, and often years and decades, and then at the end waking up and realize, wow, I was on autopilot almost the entire time. Thoreau, our famous, you know, philosopher, said famously in Walden, I went to which is the entire book, Walden, is a rhapsody about mindfulness, about being in the present moment and noticing what's here to be noticed. Nature, the pond, the weather, other people who fall by, what the leaves are doing, what the sun is doing as it moves across the sky, what the moon might be doing. It's not about the moon or the sky or nature, it's about the awareness. And it's like, it's so obvious that we're continually missing it, that we already have this capacity. We get no training in school or anywhere else. Not how to get better at awareness, how to access the awareness that you have, which is unsurpassable already. So for people who are very busy, mindfulness is really wonderful because you don't need to get one more thing to complete yourself and strive and strive and strive to get someplace else. The whole point is to actually be where you already are. And then to like find a way to befriend that, even if it's unpleasant, even if it's seriously unpleasant, even if the proverbial stuff is hitting the proverbial fan at that moment. Well, here's a kind of pop quiz for you. At those kinds of moments, you know what I'm talking about, when the proverbial stuff is hitting the proverbial fan, here's a quiz. Do you want to have 100% of your marbles, 50% of your marbles, 20% of your marbles? How much are you in this? And the answer is obvious. You want to be as fully present as possible because otherwise you're going to react mindlessly, right? And how much of the time are we busy reacting mindlessly? Close to 100%, I think. You know, unless we train the muscle. Then maybe you'll catch yourself. Or maybe you won't. You'll still say some stupid thing or be really reactive or mindful. But then you'll catch it sooner. And maybe you'll apologize. Or maybe you'll find some clever way to heal that wound or that whatever that you see that you contributed to. Maybe not caused completely. So then life itself becomes an art form. And moment by moment by moment is like a canvas. And it's like, how am I to be in wise relationship with this moment? So the two, when reporters, since you're here from the Globe and Mail, reporters often say, well, okay, I heard all this talk about mindfulness, but what is it? One word. You know, give me a one word definition of mindfulness. So mindfulness is awareness. Okay, there's the one word. And my working definition of it, it's like an operational definition, is that it's the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. Now the non-judgmental piece is huge because we've got ideas and opinions about virtually everything. Like this, don't like this, want that, don't want that. So to actually be aware of how judgmental we are is what non-judgmental means. It doesn't mean reifying some artificial non-judgmental thing, because you can't be non-judgmental, but you can be aware of how judgmental you are and then not judge that. And that's in a way like suspending judgment. We're noticing how judging we are. And then that leads to open-heartedness, kindness towards yourself, because you stop beating yourself up. Or you don't, but you notice how much you're beating yourself up. And then you can, again, slowly begin to write those restraining orders. Not necessary, it doesn't lead to anything except grief, except trauma, except sadness. And then the neurons are listening, so they associate in different ways. New synapses form, new neurons actually form in different areas of the brain that involve learning and memory and stuff like that, and also regulation of attention and emotion. And you're actually training and reshaping the real estate of your the 86 billion neurons that are sitting right inside your little old head. 86 billion. There are also 86 billion glial cells that are completely intermeshed in the brain, and no one knows what they're doing. They call them, they have housekeeping functions, you know, they're just keeping the neurons healthy. But they may have forms of intelligence that 100 years from now we'll begin to realize, oh, the glial cells, like, you know, they're not second-class citizens, they're neurons. Okay? Because evolution doesn't work that way. If they were second-class citizens, they'd be out of there. Okay, so there's a big mystery here. Now, with 86 billion neurons, that's hundreds of trillions of synaptic connections. And your thinking, your eating, your sleep patterns, how much you meditate, all of this is continually in a dynamical play with the brain reshaping itself based on experience. So the more you train, and physical exercise is like an incredibly powerful thing to do. And when you're coupling mindfulness with physical activity and physical exercise, even more so. And so we're in some sense really widening the possibilities of a life lived fully. So Thoreau said, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. So he went to Walden Pond and lived there for 2 years, paying attention to living at Walden Pond for 2 years. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, confront only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what they had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I hadn't lived. Okay? And it's all too easy to just fall into some kind of automatic pilot mode. Years go by, decades go by, you don't even know like who these children are, how did I get into this situation, who is this husband, who is this wife, you know, I'm sleeping with, you know. I mean, the automaticity can get very, very deeply rooted. And then you wake up and it's like a bad dream, maybe. So the important thing is if you really wake up, then that becomes your constitutive mode. That becomes your default mode instead of mindlessness and automaticity and automatic pilot reactivity and emotional reactivity. What about default to mindfulness? Like in this moment, see how the mind is so reactive and don't go with that. And then over time you change the circuits in the brain so that you're less likely to do that. You'll still do it, but you're less likely, and you won't criticize yourself as much. You won't blame yourself and beat yourself up. And over time, we see it in thousands and thousands of people. See it in myself. I mean, things evolve. Things move in the direction of greater self-compassion, greater wisdom, greater clarity, greater at-homeness in your own being, and even in your own body. Because in this Western society, the way things are set up, often, you know, we really want a different body, you know. Well, we want to be a different age. And women, even worse, because the society is like, you know, women's body, it hardly belongs to you in a certain way. I mean, do you know what I'm saying? And then you live in this culture, we live in this culture where we're paying attention to the wrong things. And it's like being imprisoned. And the reason mindfulness is spoken of classically in the meditative traditions as liberating is because it liberates us just from exactly from those self-constructed prisons. And societally constructed prisons, by the way. And so there's a social element to this too, is the more embodied and present you are. Well, have you ever been in the presence of anybody who's really been embodied and present and wasn't trying to scam you? It's an incredible feeling. Because that person is just present. They see you. Think back to when you were a child. Do you ever remember being seen for who you were? There's some people that grew up in families where they felt actually seen and accepted for who they are. Other people, not by their parents, maybe another adult saw them. You never forget that. You never forget that. I've been in a room, large room, you know, say, you know, a stadium with thousands and tens of thousands of people with this Dalai Lama. And people start crying before they actually get into the stadium, just with the thought that he's going to be there. And it's not all projection, it's that somehow they know and can feel, even at a distance, even without seeing him, that if he were to see you, he would accept you as you were. And then when you do see him, he's like, he picks up the pain in the room, and he doesn't go for the most important person in the best suit or whatever. He goes for the person who's like the janitor, or the person who's in the most pain, and that's who he attends to. And when, you know, so when someone's paying attention to you and really present and for you, that's a kind of recognition that all of us in some sense are starving for. So give it to your children. It doesn't cost anything, except wakefulness. You have to be aware. I'm too busy to give them my full attention. You know, if you sum that over 20 years, they'll let you know at the end. Hey, Mom, you know, Dad, you know, you weren't exactly there for me. So you see, this has implications at virtually every level. And the question is, can we actually shift our default mode? As a study from the University of Toronto with Zindel Siegel and Norman Farb's group at, you know, Zindel Siegel being one of the founders of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for depression at the University of Toronto, that you actually shift the default mode from one of mind wandering and talking about, thinking, when you do think about anything, if they put you in an fMRI scanner, has anyone ever been in an fMRI? It's very loud, but it's like a tube. You can't move. You know, you have to lie there, and they'll say something to you like, "Now don't do anything." What do you mean, do anything? Don't do anything. You know, don't just be yourself. You know, don't do anything. And then it turns out, so okay, people aren't doing anything. They were told not to do anything, and the brain lights up like crazy in this region called the sort of medial frontal cortex, so in the midline of the frontal cortex, just lots and lots of energy being used up. And when you start to ask people, what are you doing in the scanner? You're not supposed to be doing anything. They're thinking. And you know what they're thinking about? They're thinking, of course, about their favorite subject. And do you know what their favorite subject is? Moi. Say it in French. Moi. Bien sûr. I, me, and mine. What could be more interesting than my life, my failures, my successes, my lunch, my what the hell am I going to do when I get out of the scanning tube? And that takes a lot of energy up here, and this is called the default mode network, because you default to it when you're told to do nothing. This starts to light up like crazy. So we have that going all the time. The story of me, starring, of course, me. And you're all bit players in my movie. And, you know, and we were all bit players in your movie, you know, including me. You know, it's like, but, so, and a lot of mind wandering. And it's not like mind wandering is bad, because a lot of creativity comes out of mind wandering and imagination and so forth. But when people go through 8 weeks of MBSR at the University of Toronto, and they put them back in the scanner, another area of the brain lights up. This is a study that was published years ago, in 2007. Norm Farb is the first author. And this, when you ask people, well, what's lighting up here? This is still lighting up, but it's attenuated. So there's still like the story of me and that stuff. But there's a whole other network in the brain, more lateral, involves the insula and other kinds of cortical networks. And when you ask people, what are you doing there? It's like nothing. Awareness of breathing. There's no story, just now. Mind is coming, mind is going, thoughts are coming, thoughts are going. But you're not caught in anything, or you're coming back and maintaining it. So the brains actually functionally look different, and they're uncoupled, so that actually both of them can work at the same time. And so you can know that your mind is wandering all over the place, and therefore you're more back in the present moment, okay, without doing anything. So you don't have to actually work at this, but you're shifting, in some sense, the default mode network from mindlessness and self-centeredness. It's huge. If you start to just look at the personal pronouns and how much we use them during the day, especially those singular first-person personal pronouns. And this other thing where it's like, you're not actually having thoughts about you anymore, you're just aware. So you're not so self-centered. You could be aware of like space, the room, other people. And you can see more, like, you know, see the expression on people's faces, fleeting emotional expressions on people's faces, because you're not so preoccupied with yourself that you're basically blind to what anybody else is. Because why would I care what anybody else is feeling? So this has a lot of actually very profound implications when it comes to reducing your own stress, but also in some sense societally for how we can actually live and work together in ways that might promote greater well-being and good, and minimize the self-centered preoccupation of more for me and the kind of greed and hatred and delusion that ultimately, when they play out on big political, geopolitical levels, lead to you know, war and suffering and not recognizing evidence that's right in your face about global warming and things like that. That the planet, we may be giving, we're so smart, we're giving the planet a fever within a very short period of time. So all of that could be held in awareness. So mindfulness has deep ramifications on the economic level, on social levels, on political levels, on geopolitical, and, you know, sort of, and the question is, well, what are the limits here? And the answer is, we don't know. That's the beauty of the human mind. When it knows itself, you get everything that's in the Louvre and the greatest concert halls, you know. When the human mind, when it knows itself, you get beauty. When the human mind doesn't know itself, you get the killing fields of Cambodia. You get racism. You get, you know, sort of police, you know, in my country, pulling some over for a broken taillight and winding up shooting them. So you're actually murdered, and then of course you don't get there are no consequences for the police in doing that. They're almost inevitably left alone. But they're public servants. They're supposed to be helping the society. But so there are deep, endemic dis-ease elements in our society. I'm speaking of my own. And those need, in some sense, to be healed. And just the way mindfulness can be profoundly valuable in healing stress, pain, and illness, at the level of the body politic, why shouldn't we at least attempt to bring the same kind of wisdom to bear to heal the problems of the body politic? So that's all I have to say. But what would be really nice is to have some conversation about it, because we don't have a lot of time. So I don't want to just talk all the time, but I've tried to be provocative enough so that maybe there's some things to talk about, both on your own experience of the guided meditation and what I said about the guided meditation ultimately opening up to just life, and then what its ramifications might be in what you love, your work or your family, or what your contribution might be in the world.
We have a question.
So, and I've often heard this, thank you, about the self-centered and speaking from the pronoun I and moving away from that. I started practicing that, and it's so difficult. Oh. It's so difficult. So any helpful hints towards that?
The awareness of it is enough.
Yeah.
You don't need to sort of beat yourself up for not being good at it, because it's a very, very deep habit that we have from childhood, basically. It's just reinforced by virtually everything, because it's all sort of egocentric. And even the word ego, you know, it's very interesting that when Freud was translated into English, of course, he was translated on the other side of the pond by the British, and they translated, Freud wrote das Ich in German, the I, the personal pronoun. When they translated it in the UK, they called it the I. But in the US, you know, they had to spice it up. So they said, let's give it the Latin you know, let's call it the ego, and they reified a whole, when Freud was just talking about the personal pronoun. Okay, so when we actually see what the person, when we are aware of what we do out of habit with our own, we don't even know, let's say, take the breath. Remember I said, you know, are you all breathing, you know? And you know, if I were to ask you, are you breathing, would you say yes? Everybody?
Yes.
Okay. And would you say, you are breathing, right? Okay. That can't be true. Because whoever you think you are, if it were up to you to be breathing, you would have died a long time ago. You would have gotten a text or got distracted or one thing or another, like dead. Whoops, forgot to breathe, dead. So you, whoever you think you are, you're not allowed anywhere near the brainstem and the phrenic nerve and the diaphragm and what's really doing the work. That's why I mentioned in the guided meditation that it's like being breathed, okay? So it also frees us up to be more creative, because imagine how little we could get done if we had to make sure we breathed what would happen at night. You know, we'd be dead.
So who is breathing?
So who is breathing? And the most important thing is not to answer that question. The most important thing is to ask, to be interested in. Wow, not just who is breathing, why stop there? Who is thinking? You say, my thoughts, my opinion. You know, my opinion. Yeah, how many opinions do you have? Are they all completely in harmony with each other, or are you of 1,000 minds about this and that and everything else? So that's a kind of deep inquiry into the nature of what it means to be human in the form of you. Who are you? So that question, who am I or what am I, is a meditation practice in its own right, and in the Zen tradition. And you don't answer it. You follow the vector of the thought into awareness and stillness, silence, and you just rest in not knowing. So thank you for bringing that up. If you like, I'll share a couple of my favorite poems about personal pronouns, because they're very powerful.
I love that.
But let's have the conversation first. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you see certain activities as helpful in getting to that space. I'm really, really bad at meditating, really bad. But
That's what you think.
Well, that's what I think. But I can take a blanket that I'm crocheting, and that seems to, I have to concentrate enough.
That's meditation.
Okay, all right.
Totally.
That's what
Crocheting, knitting.
Yeah, because I
Who
have
knew,
to concentrate
right?
on the but it allows me to not think on other things. So that is a helpful aid in meditation.
Or to concentrate on the one thing,
Yes,
and then the other things fall away.
yes, that's right. Okay.
So whenever we're really working, have you noticed someone can come up, tap you on the shoulder and talk to you, but when you're really one-pointed, you don't hear them, right? You're really in the zone, you're focused. It's a very beautiful thing.
Okay.
But it's also only part of the story. I'll tell you a story. I worked with the U.S. Olympic rowing team back in 1984. And one of the rowers, when they were training on the Charles River in Cambridge, came in with this, he was like the national rowing champion of Puerto Rico. He came in with this report, you know. John, I had the best row of my life. I was, you know, just completely at one with the oars and my body and the boat and the movement of the boat through the water. And it was just like, you have to remember, they rowed backwards. And I rode right into a pontoon of the BU Bridge, Boston University Bridge. There was one thing I forgot to pay attention to, okay? So they all have to come together. And so if you get really one-pointed, you can actually be great at knitting, but you may not be that good at dealing with other things that are happening in that moment, because you won't even know they're happening, like, and then you're rowing to the bridge. So he got really one-pointed, and it felt fantastic, but there was one thing he forgot. So that's where the mindfulness comes in, is that's like a full 360 awareness, okay? So of course that would be true too. You're knitting, let's say you have a small child, and the child wakes up from a nap. You're going to keep on knitting? No, you're going to go attend to the child. So what we're doing is we're cultivating access to a space of the mind that we already have. and maybe not fair to just call it a space of the mind. In all Asian languages, the word for mind and the word for heart are the same word. So a word, the space of the mind also means space of the heart. So when you hear the word mindfulness, if you're not in some sense hearing the word heartfulness simultaneously, even though it's not voiced, you're not understanding it. It's an affectionate attention. It's a kind of open-heartedness to experience, even very difficult experiences, very stressful experiences. And so that's why I use the verb befriending a lot in association with meditation. It's a befriending and becoming familiar with the terrain of your own experience. And then asking that deep question, who's the experiencer? Who's actually having this experience? Socrates is famous for having said, know thyself. So one of his wise-ass students said to him, Socrates, you go around saying know thyself, but do you know yourself? And of course, being a wise-ass teacher, he rightfully said no. Because it's always good to confuse the students. If you go around saying one thing, and then they get attached to the one thing you say, good to like test them, you know. So he said no, but I understand something about this not knowing. So you have to think of mindfulness not just as knowing in the sense of awareness, not merely conceptual knowing, but a larger non-conceptual knowing. But you also have to include knowing that you don't know, because a lot of stuff we don't even know. And we don't know that we don't know. That gets us into a lot of trouble. And that's where humility comes in. And that's also where, in a certain sense, ethics comes into it. So this is a kind of profoundly ethical practice, because your ignorance can lead to harm. So really, it's important to be aware of how much you might not be aware of, say, other people's experience if they're different from you.
So I have a question. What really helped me in your talk was the autopilot, because I've been asking myself this question, and the self-centeredness and me, because I do not have children. So I've been on autopilot for the last 10 years, working on a treadmill, and the meditation that I was doing was, that's to tell you how basic the meditation was. When I hit the bed lying beside my BlackBerry, I would go, okay, white paper, go to bed. Like, go to sleep, because your mind would always wander. So that was my meditation, just saying like white paper. Of course it didn't work.
White paper means like a blank slate?
Blank slate. For me, it was like I don't think about anything, So.
And if you do say that as anxiously as you said it, the long enough maybe you'll go to sleep.
Right, exactly. And that's the kind of person I am. So it's just so it never worked.
Let's rephrase that last statement. That's the kind of person I am up to now.
Up to now.
Okay?
Yes.
Because otherwise, it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy and basically be a prison.
It's true. And then, of course, you're aware, so you're aware that
I use the personal singular.
I am aware that there are techniques and tools out there. So Eckhart Tolle and So I see myself like listening to Eckhart Tolle in the car, and he's saying, "Be aware of the now." I'm looking at the red light. I'm looking at, oh, that's a really nice car. So it's for me it's very hard. But one of the things that you mentioned today, which I think really hit me, is the underwater. That 30 feet below, that image, I think is going to work for me.
I hope so. That's a very ancient image. I didn't make it up. It's all in all the meditative traditions, but the power of it is that, you see, you're already okay. Yeah. See, we work in a kind of fixed, broken mentality. Medicine is like auto mechanics model of medicine. You drive your car around until don't pay any attention to it. When it breaks down, you drive it into the shop and they'll replace whatever needs replacing. It'll fix you. It's a very bad model for a human body, because we are a dynamical system that there are very, very few fixes in medicine. Even with the new genetic medicine, it's getting better, but that throws healing, the autocatalytic healing that the body does for itself, out the window. And what we need to do is reclaim it in some sense. So when you realize that you're already okay, then you don't have to get improved. Mindfulness is not about improving yourself, because there's no improving who you really are. But the trouble is, we don't know who you really are, because But what about the being okay with the not knowing? Of course, when a cop pulls you over and wants to give you a speeding ticket, you don't say, "Officer, I don't know who I am, so I can give you my identification." You give them your driver's license, and you pretend that's who you are. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I'm a leader. I work with leaders at the university, and part of what we do is many leadership programs. We help them develop skills on planning, analyzing the past, planning the future, envisioning the future.
Right, scenario building.
Empathizing with others, if you get to the personal dimension. But all of those skills on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the program are
outwardly
planning in the future, analyzing the past,
Yeah.
empathizing with you. And then we introduce now mindfulness practice into this, and that's starting to take on some interest. But I have this dichotomy that I have to resolve somehow around how do I teach a leader who absolutely has to be an effective planner and an envisioner of the future state of their organization. How do I reconcile, teaching those skills, but teaching them also how to be in the present?
A mindful leader.
It's a very profound question. I don't think you can teach it. I think you have to show them. They have to discover it for themselves in a certain way. That thought, even the greatest thought, only takes you so far. And we're not smart enough to actually prognosticate the future. No matter how much planning we do, things don't go according to plan, and that's even in peacetime. In wartime, it's like everybody knows, the fog of war sets in and stuff like that. The scenarios about what happened in the past that have led to this, they're all stories, and a lot of those narratives, they're not completely correct, but you can believe them. Please don't take this wrong. It's not a criticism of leadership programs, but I think that the leadership programs and coaching leaders and so forth would be really enhanced by turning things upside down, and rather than developing those skills, develop the presencing skills and let them do all the work. And then you can say, because the mind is going to always default to the past and seeing those kinds of patterns and prognostication in the future. But the present, which is the only real wellspring of creativity, that's often sort of only put in as an afterthought or something like that. Or now mindfulness is so popular, it's getting into all these things. But what if mindfulness were absolutely fundamental? And what if actually you can't make someone into a leader? That you have that's a labor of love. That's a love affair too. That what it means to lead, at least for me, is to have no idea what you're doing, but to trust that something will emerge, either within a group of people who have kind of shared inspiration, or sometimes it's the solo person doing it, and then other people are inspired downstream, and they will follow. But that person has no idea that they're leading anything. They're just doing what they're doing out of love. And everybody says, "Holy cow, what an amazing thing." I mean, Edison, for instance, or, we can pick out thousands of people who we now think were like leaders in their field, but they weren't actually leaders. What they were, inspirers of other people to actually go deep into themselves. And then when you have a collective of people, David Bohm wrote a lot about this, and maybe you know it through Peter Senge or Otto Scharmer or those kinds of people who do leadership stuff, that when what I said about concussion and percussion and discussion, that's the reason to have dialogue. And when you have dialogue among a group of people working together, you get levels of creativity and insight that often don't reside within the head of one person. They come there, all of us shared it around the table when we listen in a very deep way without our usual critical shooting down what everybody else says because it's stupid. So I'm not sure this has answered your question, but I think there's some really fecund soil of creativity there where you might ask, if you think of mindfulness as one more method or technique that's going to be integrated into a whole schema of how you teach leadership, I don't think mindfulness is amenable to that, actually, although it happens and lots of people are doing it. But I think it's a disservice all around. That I think the most important thing to do is to actually practice so that one-person meditation is the counterpart of the everybody around the table. That dialogue is actually a group meditation. And if everybody's being open-hearted and non-judgmental and allowing the future to emerge in the present, out of the present, as Otto Scharmer writes about in Theory U, in a book that he called about titled The Emerging Future or something like that. To me, I think it taps more into what the potential power of mindfulness could be for true leadership. But it would mean doing something wildly orthogonal and not merely trying to put it into a framework that the word that I would, again, this is not a judgment or criticism, but a kind of conventional leadership framework. Not to say that you're conventional, because I don't know anything about you, but there's a tendency to kind of just do the same old what everybody else is doing. But to actually be much more not knowing about it and ask, what are all these ingredients together trying to merge into? And then not just trust your cognitive ability to come up with an answer, but to trust the multiple intelligences, somatic and social, to actually come up with an answer that may be very different from what thought by itself would come up with. Does that make any sense to you, what I just said?
It's giving me a place to start, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate the question, and please do not take it as a criticism,
no.
because I don't know you at all, but
I'm on that same side of the examination of what we should be doing, and what I took away is that this rises above strategy and planning and assessment, and all those things are things that we do.
Yeah.
But maybe that's not even the domain of leadership. Those are just
exactly. That there may be something, and I wouldn't say above,
doing,
underneath it. What is the soil? You know, the sort of
maybe it's below
below it, out of which it's growing. And I can tell you that, you know, because I've taught there a number of times at the Harvard Business School and so forth. That these things are now moving into the framework of business schools and leadership programs, classical leadership programs, in what I hope are, and I used the word before, orthogonal ways. What I mean by orthogonal is it's kind of like it's rotated 90 degrees in phase space from the geometry of reality, so to speak. So it's from quantum mechanics, and it allows different elementary particles to occupy the same space at the same time. So what would a mindful institution look like? It would look like the same from the outside as any other mindful hospital, mindful, you know, Department of Medicine, or mindful corporation. Well, from the outside it would look just the same. It'd still pay its bills, it would still have payroll and, you know, so forth. But from the inside it'd be a different planet, because everybody would feel like they belonged, that they were working for something that was much bigger than themselves, that they were willing to work for less money because they loved so much what they were doing, they just didn't want to leave. What about a workplace like that? And if there was somebody who was leading that, it wouldn't look like they were leading it. It would just be like they were part of this unfolding where everybody played their role. And so it's like a little Taoist perspective on leadership, that the more you don't do anything, nothing is left undone. But how you do that, that's an art form. It's like a martial art. You know, it's like if you watch these old Chinese people do Tai Chi, for instance, or Qigong, and, you know, and you can see this on YouTube, I mean, or television. You know, 80, 90-year-old Tai Chi master, and you take like an NFL football player and just have them get back 30 feet and try to just knock them over. Because so one's like 20 years old or 25 years old, and the other's like 80 years old. And you can hardly see what happens. It happens so fast, but they know enough about human energy that they're just like, the NFL player is like on the floor, or is trying to push the guy over from a standing position and cannot push over an 80-year-old man. So they're doing something with their energy that's like totally different from what you're doing on a football field. And it's very humbling to see that this is actually not bullshit. This is like real, you know? And it's the same with loving kindness. It's the same with what I was talking about at the Dalai Lama, that when a human being is present without an agenda, not trying to scam you or, you know, sort of more for me, you feel it in a deep way. You feel seen, you feel met, you feel whole yourself because you're being recognized by someone else who's in that space of wholeness. Yeah?
Well, thank you very much first for everything. I am a truly follower of you, and I've been following like the same 10 years ago. And I've been creating different things for workplace, a program called Click Within. And now I'm into empowering more people by exactly what you said, improving their knowing who they are. So in my presence, in my coaching, in my dance, because I use all of my body and my breath.
Wonderful.
So they feel the presence and they can feel liberated by they just being themselves.
Totally.
And I can see the benefits, I can see the results when they are in front of me. Most of the time I have videos, so I can get into wherever they are in Colombia because I'm from Colombia, so I do it a lot in Spanish, mindfulness in Spanish. But right now, there is so much changes in their life, and there is a lot of not a way to be compassionate with themselves. So as much as I can help them to recognize their own beauty, their nature, what they are, so they can just start in the mindfulness phase. Sometimes that transition, that divorce, losing someone. A lot of my clients are in Mexico. They are in all the coast right now. And they're dealing hard to say, okay, I don't have time for mindfulness right now because I need to cry and I need to overcome life.
Yeah.
So what you can, you'd say so many things, and not just you, all of you, so thank you so much for that. But how can I help them, you know, create more impact in their lives when they are in that suffering state?
Well, this is all about suffering. I mean, I didn't, I started this in the hospital where we were catching people falling through the cracks of the hospital, so just endless suffering. And not just physical suffering, but psychological suffering, trauma of every single kind. So that's what this is all about. That's what mindfulness is about. Even the Buddha, because mindfulness is spoken of as the heart of Buddhist meditation. But it's not Buddhist. It's universal. It's like the law of gravity is not English because of Newton, and or Italian because of Galileo. And in the same way, the law of mindfulness, or lawfulness, or what they call the Dharma of mindfulness, is not Indian or Chinese or Japanese or anything like that. It's really human. So I don't want this to sound facile, because there's no facile answer to it, but people have to experience what they're experiencing. But your being in wise relationship with them is huge, because they know that that's trustworthy, that you care, and you're not trying to fix them. You're not trying to take away their suffering. The only thing you can do with suffering is put the welcome mat out for it, and then find out that, oh, it's very interesting suffering, because who is suffering? You could ask, like, who is suffering? And when you say, well, I'm suffering, well, are there any parts of you that are not suffering right in this moment? I mean, is there more right with you than wrong with you, even though all this stuff is happening? And you ask people to, like, even look at that. Not just think about it, but look at it. But of course, you're not out there selling mindfulness or selling dance or anything like that. You're inviting people into a space where they can learn something for themselves. It's like a laboratory, a living laboratory. And this is kind of an enterprise that's going to take centuries. It's not going to, it's like for human beings to wake up. It's not going to happen overnight. I mean, so we're going to magically teach Trump to meditate, and all of a sudden it's gonna, it's like, it's not about that. It's about seeing things as they are and finding loving ways to be of use to people who are suffering. And sometimes it's just certainly not trying to fix them, but just being there, and they know you're there.
Correct.
And it's like you don't say it'll all be okay. You know, it's a totally condescending. It won't all be okay, but we're capable of handling far more than we think. So let me just, because we have to leave, right? So let me just leave you with these two poems, okay? Personal pronoun poems. First is by Emily Dickinson. I'll only say them once because of time. Usually they're worth saying 3 or 4 times. So you have to listen very carefully to Emily Dickinson because no one ever did English the way she did. And a lot of this has to do with being so hurt in love that the poem is saying, if there was some way that I could fortify myself so that I would never ever feel anything, then I would never be hurt again. So probably a lot of us have had that experience, you know, at one point or another. Me, from myself, to banish, had I art, impregnable my fortress unto all heart. But since myself assault me, how have I peace, except by subjugating consciousness? And since we're mutual monarch, how this be, except by abdication, me of me? Can you feel that? Okay. So we abdicate all the time. We stuff certain parts of ourselves into closets and bags and never look at them, and you know, we feel like broken and, you know, wounded and unworthy, and that's what the abdication does. So here's the second poem by Derek Walcott, who's Afro-Caribbean from the island of St. Lucia, won the Nobel Prize and recently died within the last year or so. The time will come when with elation you will greet yourself arriving at your own door. In your own mirror, and each will smile at the others, welcome, and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart, yourself. To the stranger who has loved you all your life, who you have ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life. So that's what the meditation practice is. It's like feasting on your life. Sometimes it's sitting, sometimes it's running, sometimes it's running late. But it's always feasting. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can we keep you?
I'm not ready for this.
No, you can't keep me, but you can keep you. This is like, I'm taking that very seriously, actually, because, you know, be careful to project onto other people what they're bringing to the table, because the very fact that you can see what they're bringing to the table means that it's in you. And so rather than projecting some kind of whatever onto others, which is toxic for them and not so healthy for you, ask, what is it in me that's resonating with this, because it's the same something, and nurture it, feed it. And what is the fuel that will feed that? It's love. It's attending. It's paying attention. And for that, you need to devote a certain amount of time and energy. Everybody's got the same 24 hours. Nobody's got time for non-doing or meditating. But if it's really important, nobody's got time to not practice in that way. And just a tiny little bit of formal practice can anchor 24/7 of everyday life practice. Okay, so the real practice, as I started out saying, is how you live your life, including all of your relationships. So it's not just about me, myself. That's, you know, so that's a kind of, in a nutshell. It also takes like no time at all and a lot of work.